We've decided to restructure the client relations department, Ruth. Today will be your last day. The words hung in the air of the sleek conference room like an unwelcome odor. I stared at Dominic Hayes, the new managing partner who had joined Franklin and Associates just 8 months ago. His expression was practiced, a careful blend of corporate regret and detached professionalism. After 25 years? My voice remained steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. Business decisions aren't personal, he replied, sliding a manila folder across the polished table. HR has prepared a severance package, 2 months' salary and continuation of benefits through the end of the quarter. Janice from HR sat beside him, nodding sympathetically while avoiding eye contact. The necessary downsizing affects several departments, she added. This isn't a reflection on your performance. Wasn't it, though? At 58, I was the oldest employee in client relations. My salary was commensurate with my experience that had helped build Franklin and Associates from a scrappy legal consulting firm into an industry leader. Does Arthur know about this? I asked, referring to Arthur Franklin, the founding partner who had personally hired me 25 years ago. Dominic's jaw tightened. All partners were consulted on restructuring decisions. An obvious non-answer. Arthur had been in London for the past 3 weeks, negotiating our expansion into the European market. Best of luck in your future endeavors, Dominic concluded with a smile that never reached his eyes. Security will escort you to clear out your desk. Standard protocol. I'd helped write that protocol 12 years ago. My name is Ruth Pearson, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the Senior Director of Client Relations at Franklin and Associates, one of Boston's premier legal consulting firms. I'd devoted my career to building relationships with our clients, understanding their needs, anticipating their concerns, and ensuring they felt valued beyond the billable hours. In an industry where firms were often seen as interchangeable, I'd made sure our clients saw us as irreplaceable. Now I was being discarded like an outdated policy manual, with nothing but a manila folder and platitudes to show for a quarter-century of dedication. As the security guard hovered awkwardly by my desk, I methodically packed my personal items. Photos with clients at charity galas. Thank you notes from the Chambers family after we helped them navigate a complex corporate restructuring. The crystal paperweight Arthur had given me on my 20th work anniversary. My phone buzzed, a text from Catherine Winters, CEO of Winters Healthcare, our largest client. Ruth, heard troubling rumors about changes at F&A. Our quarterly review is next week. Call me ASAP. I looked up to see Dominic watching from his office, already on the phone, no doubt spinning damage control. What he didn't know, what none of them seemed to understand, was that client relationships couldn't be transferred in a memo or reassigned in a database. They were built on trust, consistency, and personal connection, and I had just been severed from 25 years' worth of those connections. I joined Franklin and Associates in 1998, when we occupied half a floor in a modest office building and had exactly 17 clients. Arthur Franklin was 42 then, bursting with ambition and determined to create a different kind of consulting firm, one where client satisfaction genuinely mattered more than billable hours. Numbers are the language of business, Ruth, he'd told me during my interview, but relationships are its heart. Anyone can crunch numbers. Not everyone can build trust. Over the years, I'd embodied that philosophy. While others chased promotions through high-profile projects and office politics, I focused on becoming indispensable to our clients. I remembered their children's names and college choices. I knew which clients wanted detailed technical explanations and which preferred big-picture summaries. I tracked company milestones, leadership changes, and strategic pivots so we could anticipate their needs rather than merely respond to them. You're the relationship architect, Arthur had said at my 20th anniversary celebration. You've built the foundation that supports everything we do. The firm had grown steadily under Arthur's leadership, but things began to change 2 years ago when we took on outside investors to fuel expansion. New partners joined the leadership team, bringing Harvard MBAs and strategic visions that increasingly prioritized efficiency metrics over client experience. Dominic Hayes, with his slick presentations and ruthless focus on the bottom line, had been the most aggressive of these additions. Since his arrival, employee turnover had increased by 40%. The unofficial motto had shifted from Arthur's clients first to Dominic's maximum value extraction. I'd voiced concerns during executive meetings, pointing out that our client retention rates were beginning to slip. "We're sacrificing long-term stability for short-term gains," I'd argued. "The market is changing, Ruth," Dominic had responded dismissively. "We need to adapt or die. Some of our legacy processes are frankly outdated." I'd noticed my gradual exclusion from strategic discussions over the past 6 months. Meeting invitations stopped arriving. Email threads omitted my address. Younger team members were assigned to key client accounts as secondary contacts without my consultation. Still, I'd assumed my institutional knowledge and client relationships would protect me. After all, I managed relationships with clients who represented over 60% of our annual revenue. Catherine Winters alone brought in nearly $4 million yearly and had explicitly stated in her last contract renewal that she wanted me as her primary contact. Recently, though, I'd sensed something more ominous brewing. Last week, I'd overheard Dominic on the phone. "The restructuring gives us an opportunity to trim the legacy fat. Their retirement plans would cost us millions in the long run." I should have seen it coming, but after 25 years, I'd made the mistake of thinking loyalty still counted for something. The humiliation of being escorted from the building like a security threat still burned 3 days later. I sat in my apartment surrounded by job search websites and unanswered texts from colleagues. My LinkedIn profile had exploded with views, nothing like a sudden termination to make you temporarily interesting. My landline rang, a rare occurrence these days. I almost let it go to voicemail until I recognized the number. "Hello?" "Ruth, it's Arthur." His familiar British accent was tighter than usual. "I just landed from London and heard the news. This wasn't authorized by me." A complicated wave of emotions crashed over me. Relief that Arthur hadn't approved my termination, anger that it had happened anyway, and a lingering sense of betrayal that he hadn't protected me despite our history. "Well, it happened regardless," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Dominic said all partners were consulted. "I was deliberately sidelined," Arthur said, his frustration evident. "They waited until I was overseas dealing with the EU regulatory issues. The executive committee pushed it through on an emergency approval basis, citing immediate necessity to improve quarterly projections before our investor meeting." 25 years, Arthur. I deserved better than a 10-minute meeting and a security escort. "You deserved much better," he agreed. "I want to make this right. What if I bring you back? We can call it a misunderstanding, a communication error." "It's not that simple," I interrupted. Dominic made it crystal clear that I'm considered dispensable. Legacy fat was the term I heard him use. The silence on the other end told me Arthur understood the significance of what I was saying. In the corporate world, being undermined by leadership was a death sentence to effectiveness. There was no coming back from that, not really. "I'm sorry, Ruth, truly. This company was built on the relationships you nurtured." "And how are those relationships being maintained now that I'm gone?" I asked. Another pause. "Dominic assigned your accounts to the junior partners. Melissa Bennett is handling Winters' healthcare." I couldn't suppress a dry laugh. Catherine Winters had openly clashed with Melissa during a strategy session last year, finding her approach too aggressive and impersonal. Good luck with that. After hanging up, I stared at my phone as it began to light up with notifications. Clients were reaching out, not just Catherine, but Douglas from Archer Pharmaceuticals, Belinda from Summit Financial, the entire executive team at Westridge Manufacturing. Word was spreading about my departure. I hadn't reached out to any of them. I was too professional to badmouth my former employer, regardless of how they'd treated me. But clients talk to each other. They belong to the same industry groups, sit on the same boards, attend the same conferences. My doorbell rang. A courier handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a formal letter from Catherine Goldstein, the most sought-after headhunter in Boston's consulting world, along with a handwritten note. Heard what happened at F&A. Several firms would value your client portfolio. Dinner tomorrow? I set the letter down, thinking about Dominic's smug face as he'd terminated me. I wasn't going to sabotage Franklin and Associates. I didn't need to. They had already done that themselves. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:38 a.m. Catherine Winters, never one to waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me you're not actually gone," she demanded without preamble. "I'm afraid I am," I replied, pouring my coffee. "Restructuring, they called it." "Bullshit," Catherine snapped. "I've worked exclusively with you for 12 years. Melissa Bennett emailed me yesterday introducing herself as my new relationship manager. That girl tried to explain my own business model to me last year." I chose my words carefully. Franklin and Associates is making strategic changes. I'm sure they believe they're acting in the best interest of their clients. "Don't give me the corporate line, Ruth. We've known each other too long." Catherine paused. "Where are you going next?" "I haven't decided yet." "Well, decide quickly. Our contract with F&A is up for renewal in 60 days. I'd prefer to follow you." This was the moment I should have said something reassuring about Franklin and Associates, about the quality of their work remaining consistent despite personnel changes. That's what professionalism dictated. Instead, I said, "I appreciate your confidence, Catherine. Let me explore my options and get back to you." By noon, I'd received similar calls from 5 other major clients. By dinner time, that number had risen to 11. I hadn't solicited any of them. I hadn't needed to. Catherine Goldstein met me at an upscale restaurant in Back Bay, her sharp eyes assessing me over reading glasses. "You're the talk of the industry right now," she said after ordering. "Dominic Hayes made a catastrophic mistake." "Perhaps," I said noncommittally. She laughed. "Always diplomatic. That's part of your appeal." She slid a folder across the table. 3 firms want to meet with you. 2 are creating a special position specifically to bring you and your client relationships on board. I glanced at the compensation figures and nearly choked on my water. They were offering almost double my previous salary. "They're not just paying for your expertise," Catherine explained, reading my expression. "They're paying for your little black book." The irony wasn't lost on me. After being discarded as too expensive by Franklin and Associates, I was now worth twice as much to their competitors. I wondered if Dominic had considered this possibility in his cost-cutting calculations. The next morning, Arthur called again. "I need to see you," he said, sounding uncharacteristically agitated. "Can you come to the office?" "I don't think that's appropriate, given the circumstances." "Then lunch, the Harvest, 1 p.m. Please, Ruth. Things are happening that you should know about." Curiosity got the better of me. At precisely 1 p.m., I walked into the Harvest to find Arthur already seated, looking haggard. "Thank you for coming," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I've been trying to fix this situation, but Dominic is blocking me at every turn. He's convinced the board that your termination was necessary for modernizing our approach." "And the clients?" I asked. "How are they responding to this modernization?" Arthur winced. "Not well. Catherine Winters has demanded a meeting with the entire executive team. Douglas from Archer is reviewing their options. 3 smaller clients have already given notice." I sipped my water, saying nothing. "Here's what I'm proposing," Arthur continued, leaning forward. "I create a new position, Chief Client Officer, reporting directly to me, bypassing Dominic entirely. Better compensation, more autonomy." It sounded perfect, exactly what I would have wanted a week ago. Too perfect. I studied Arthur's expression and saw something beyond concern. Fear. "What aren't you telling me, Arthur?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Dominic has a plan to push me into early retirement. He's been consolidating power, building alliances with the newer partners. If the client situation deteriorates further, he'll use it as leverage to force me out." So that was it. Arthur wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to save himself. I was simply the means to that end. I'm sorry, Arthur, but I already have meetings scheduled with other firms. You understand? Business decisions aren't personal. The look on his face as I threw Dominic's words back at him almost made the whole ordeal worthwhile. Almost. Over the next week, I met with all 3 firms Catherine had recommended. Each meeting followed a similar pattern: effusive praise for my client relationship skills, thinly veiled questions about which clients might follow me, and increasingly generous compensation offers. I was leaning toward Blackwell Consulting, a mid-sized firm with values reminiscent of the original Franklin and Associates. Their offer included equity partnership, something I'd never been offered at F&A despite my contributions to the firm's growth. Meanwhile, the situation at Franklin and Associates was deteriorating faster than even I had anticipated. Industry blogs were reporting client unrest and leadership tensions. My former assistant, Thomas, texted me updates. Catherine Winters had indeed met with the executive team and left visibly angry. Douglas from Archer Pharmaceuticals had canceled their quarterly review. Even Westridge Manufacturing, a client known for their institutional loyalty, was rumored to be seeking proposals from competitors. Then came the call that changed everything. Ruth Pearson. I answered while reviewing Blackwell's offer letter. Ms. Pearson, this is Jeffrey Hammond from the Boston Business Journal. I sat up straighter. The BBJ was the Bible of Boston's corporate world. I'm working on a story about the recent leadership changes at Franklin and Associates and their impact on client relationships. Several sources have mentioned your name. Would you be willing to comment? This was dangerous territory. Anything I said could be construed as disparaging my former employer, potentially exposing me to legal action under the non-disparagement clause in my severance agreement. I'm not comfortable commenting on internal matters at Franklin and Associates, I replied carefully. Understandable, Hammond said. What about the fact that 7 major clients have already announced they're terminating their relationships with F&A? Industry insiders are suggesting this exodus is directly related to your departure. 7 clients? I'd only spoken directly with 15, and none had definitively stated they were leaving F&A. I can't speak to clients' business decisions, I said. Many factors go into selecting consulting partners. Of course. I could hear Hammond typing. One more question. Any comment on the letter signed by 26 of F&A's clients demanding Arthur Franklin replace Dominic Hayes as managing partner? I nearly dropped the phone. I have no knowledge of such a letter. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. 26 clients? An organized demand to replace Dominic? I hadn't orchestrated any of this. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Emergency all-hands meeting called for tomorrow morning. Partners flying in from everywhere. Dominic looks like he's about to have a stroke. An hour later, Arthur called. Did you organize this client revolt? He demanded without preamble. I've done nothing, Arthur. I haven't solicited a single client. Then how do you explain this? He sounded desperate. 70% of our client base is threatening to leave. The board is in panic mode. Investors are demanding answers I don't have. Perhaps they value relationship continuity more than cost-cutting efficiency, I suggested. This isn't a joke, Ruth. 25 years of building this firm, and it could collapse in 25 days. There was a bitter satisfaction in hearing the panic in Arthur's voice, the same Arthur who had failed to protect me after 25 years of loyalty. What do you want from me, Arthur? Come back, he pleaded, not as chief client officer, as full equity partner. Help me stabilize the situation. Partner. The position I'd deserved for at least a decade, but had been repeatedly denied. And Dominic? Arthur's voice hardened. The board is meeting tonight. His future will be decided before tomorrow's all-hands meeting. I thought about the Blackwell offer in front of me. Partnership there would be comfortable, lucrative, and far less complicated than returning to F&A. But I'd built those client relationships over 25 years. They were, in many ways, my life's work. I need to think about it, I said finally. I'll give you my answer in the morning. Sleep eluded me that night. I paced my apartment, weighing my options while the digital clock ticked toward morning. Returning to Franklin and Associates would mean facing the colleagues who had watched my humiliating exit in silence. It would mean navigating the political aftermath of Dominic's apparent downfall, a downfall I hadn't engineered but would certainly be blamed for. The firm's culture had been deteriorating for years. One leadership change wouldn't fix that overnight. On the other hand, Blackwell offered a fresh start. New colleagues, new culture, new opportunities. The compensation and partnership were generous. I could bring willing clients with me and build something vibrant. By 6 a.m., I'd made my decision. I called Catherine Goldstein, knowing she'd be awake. I'm going with Blackwell, I told her. Smart choice, she replied. I'll let them know. They'll be thrilled. There's something else I need from them, I added, explaining my condition. Catherine listened, then laughed. Ruthless Ruth, I love it. I'll present it to them this morning. At 8:45 a.m., I walked into Franklin and Associates for the first time since my termination. The receptionist's eyes widened. Ms. Pearson, are you here for the all-hands meeting? I am. Arthur is expecting me. The conference room was packed when I arrived. Partners who normally attended virtually had flown in from across the country. Junior staff crowded along the walls. Arthur stood at the front, flanked by board members. Dominic was conspicuously absent. A hush fell over the room as I entered. Arthur's relief was visible from across the room. Thank you all for coming, he began. As you know, we're facing unprecedented client concerns following recent staffing decisions. His eyes flickered to me. I'm pleased to announce that Ruth Pearson has agreed to return to Franklin and Associates as a full equity partner, leading our newly formed client relations division. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Arthur raised his hand for silence. Additionally, the board has unanimously voted to remove Dominic Hayes as managing partner, effective immediately. His approach was ultimately deemed inconsistent with our firm's values and client commitment. The atmosphere in the room was electric, shock, relief, and uncertainty mingling almost visibly in the air. Ruth, would you like to say a few words? Arthur gestured me forward. As I took my place at the front of the room, I saw Thomas give me a subtle thumbs up from the back wall. I surveyed the faces before me, some hopeful, some wary, all attentive. Thank you, Arthur. I appreciate the offer to return as partner, I began. However, I must clarify something important. I'm not coming back to Franklin and Associates. Arthur's face froze in confusion. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. Instead, I continued calmly, I'm pleased to announce that I've accepted a partnership position at Blackwell Consulting, which has just completed acquisition negotiations with Horizon Capital to purchase a controlling interest in Franklin and Associates. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. Arthur looked as though he'd been struck. The transition will begin next week, I continued once the noise subsided. Blackwell has assured me they value the institutional knowledge and client relationships built here. There are no plans for mass layoffs or restructuring, unless, of course, they're deemed necessary for efficiency. Arthur stepped forward. Ruth, what have you done? I haven't done anything, Arthur. Blackwell has been seeking to expand their Boston presence for years. Horizon Capital, as majority shareholder in F&A, was happy to consider their offer, especially given recent client instability. It's just business after all, nothing personal. As the implications sank in, I saw the dawning realization in Arthur's eyes. He had failed to protect me when it mattered. He had allowed loyalty to be sacrificed for short-term gains. Now, facing his own obsolescence, he understood the true cost of those decisions. The meeting dissolved into chaos as I walked out, head high. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Winters. Just heard the news. Dinner tonight to discuss Winters Healthcare's future with Blackwell Franklin? I smiled as I stepped into the elevator. I hadn't sought revenge, but justice had found its way to me nonetheless. The Boston Business Journal broke the story the next morning. Consulting shakeup. Blackwell acquires Franklin and Associates after client exodus. The article detailed how the departure of a key senior executive had triggered an unprecedented client revolt, destabilizing the firm enough to make the acquisition possible. My name appeared only once, buried in the 15th paragraph. Ruth Pearson, former Senior Director of Client Relations, has accepted a partnership at Blackwell and will oversee the integration of Franklin and Associates client portfolios. It was a clinical description of what was, in reality, a seismic power shift. Within 3 weeks, I had gone from terminated employee to the person controlling the fate of the very firm that had discarded me. The integration planning began immediately. I worked from Blackwell's offices, reviewing organizational charts and client portfolios from both firms. Each day brought a parade of former Franklin colleagues to my door, some seeking reassurance about their positions, others suddenly remembering how they'd always respected my work, or disagreed with Dominic's decision. Arthur requested a meeting 1 week after the acquisition announcement. He'd aged a decade in 20 days. "You orchestrated this," he said as he sat across from me. Not a question, but an accusation. "No, Arthur. I simply recognized my own value even when you didn't." "Dominic was a symptom, not the cause," I interrupted. "You allowed the firm's culture to change. You prioritized growth over relationships. You forgot the principles you founded the company on. And now you control it all," he said bitterly. "Not control, Arthur. Influence. There's a difference, one you used to understand." I slid a document across the desk. "Blackwell is offering you a 3-year consulting position. Advisory only, no management responsibilities. It's generous, considering the circumstances." He stared at the paper, then at me. "And if I refuse, then you walk away with nothing but your ownership payout. Your choice." 6 months after the acquisition, Blackwell Franklin Consulting occupied 2 floors of a gleaming downtown tower. The integration had been smoother than anyone anticipated, partly because I'd insisted on retaining most of Franklin's staff, knowing their value even when others hadn't. Dominic had landed at a smaller firm, his reputation tarnished by the spectacular collapse he'd triggered. Arthur had accepted the consulting role, though our interactions remained strictly professional. The wound of betrayal, his failure to protect me after 25 years, would never fully heal. In my corner office, I reviewed the quarterly numbers with a satisfaction I'd never allowed myself to show publicly. Client retention through the transition had exceeded 95%. The 3 clients who'd left during the initial exodus had already returned. Our combined revenues were up 23% year over year. My assistant knocked and entered. "Ms. Winters is here for your lunch." Catherine strode in, elegant as always in a tailored suit. "Congratulations on the quarterly results. The industry is still talking about the most elegant corporate takeover they've seen in decades." I smiled. "It wasn't a takeover. It was a market correction." "Call it what you want," Catherine laughed. "You proved what I've always known. In professional services, the relationships are the real asset. Everything else is just infrastructure." As we headed to lunch, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. I hadn't sought revenge when Franklin and Associates terminated me. I hadn't needed to. The firm had failed to recognize that their true value wasn't in their systems or strategies or even their brand. It was in the human connections that made clients feel understood, valued, and prioritized. By severing me without understanding what I represented, they had orchestrated their own downfall. And in doing so, they had inadvertently launched me into a position I'd earned through 25 years of dedication. Sometimes justice doesn't require action. Sometimes it simply requires patience and the quiet confidence of knowing your own worth.